Kubrick never carried cigarettes. If you wanted to be his friend, carry cigarettes. It's kind of hard to know where to start. I'm a kind of a weird maverick in the movie industry because I see movies as a highly technical art form. It doesn't have to be. There's certainly a lot of very, very talented directors who have made wonderful movies without really having to know too much about lighting because they let the lighting guy do that, or too much about photography because they let the cinematographer do that, or whatever. My point of view about this whole thing is that it is, for me to do what I want to do, I need to understand every nut and bolt and every aspect of the process that I'm working in so that I can figure out how to break the rules and do something new and different. And so I have always been doing that. I'm going to start with a weird little film that I want you to bear with me a little bit. I'm going to start a little bit, and the show tonight is about 2001, but to me it's about more than 2001 because it's about the whole issue of the cinema. What is the cinema? What is the experience of going to movies? Is it just an experience of a director's vision or a writer's vision or a collaboration? Or can it be something that is really blows you away and that you enter into the movie and become part of the movie? And that's the biggest underlying theme of my whole career, is how to get there. And I was seduced by Stanley Kubrick in my very early days as a impressionable young man, because I started working on this movie when I was about 23 or 24. And here I am working in this giant 70 millimeter Cinerama film process, making this movie that completely breaks every cinema convention known to man and has not been surpassed in the 45 years since, because it really goes into new territory that very few people truly get a grip on. And so that's what I'll be talking everything I can about 2001 tonight, but you'll know in my mind that I'm thinking about issues of immersive cinema and how that bears upon what I want to say. In the very early 60s, I was a young illustrator, completely fascinated with science fiction. I thought I was an illustrator, but I used to paint things like this. This is hanging on my wall at my office, but it's a spacecraft, alien planet. My portfolio was full of this kind of thing. And it ended up getting me a job at a company called Graphic Films. And one of the films I worked on, amongst many, was a film for the New York World's Fair called To the Moon and Beyond, which at my impressionable young age was a heck of a lot of fun because it was shot in a 10 perforation, 70 millimeter film process, photographed with fisheye lenses, wider than Cinerama, and projected into a planetarium dome at the World's Fair in New York. And even that little, I'm painting a little galaxy there. That's actually a photograph of a galaxy that was painted with wet paint, photographed with a 4x5 camera, just the moment the paint was in the right position. Then I'd paste it down and airbrush it. And it was one of a zillion photographs that went into this movie that was this amazing immersive experience. And here was one of the rigs where that's me on the upper left when I used to really look good. And multiple planes of glass. This was kind of a biological sequence of bacteria and things. And the camera's here on the right. You'll see it's what's called a bipack camera. There's actually a magazine above and a magazine below, and there's two pieces of film running through this camera. The front piece of film is the matte that's holding back part of the scene. The back piece of the film is the negative, and I'll explain that later because that's how we did 2001. So anyway, this movie ended up in the New York World's Fair in 1964 and 1965, projected into this planetarium dome. And Arthur Clarke and Stanley Kubrick saw this movie. And they thought, well, that's really cool because we want to make a really good science fiction movie, and this kind of proves to us that such a thing is actually feasible, that you could do special effects and space imagery and stars and planets and galaxies, and it might not look too bad. So to make a long story short, I ended up getting a job working for Stanley Kubrick when I was at this company, Graphic Films, designing lunar bases and lunar things for 2001. This was a very early design I did, which got mailed to Stanley in New York. And I did a lot of these things that actually, are not dissimilar to things that you'll see in the movie. and even a little pod here that predated the pod in 2001, manipulator arms and a guy inside with little rocket engines around it and everything. And I found out that a movie that we saw at Graphic Films that we all loved and thought was absolutely fantastic, called Universe, had been made by the National Film Board of Canada in the early 60s. A fantastic space movie, 35 millimeter film, black and white, tons of 100-layer deep photographic multiplane kind of space shots. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that right now because Stanley Kubrick and Arthur Clarke saw this movie at least 100 times before they made 2001. It was the second validation that making 2001 a space science fiction movie could actually work. So I'm going to show you a little Universe because there are shots here that actually predate 2001. You'll see them in 2001. I'll point them out with my laser pointer. The moon. Stars. The lunar surface. Lens flares. Very, very important. Moving along the lunar surface, exactly like what we did for the moon bus in 2001. I'll show you later. The occultation shot at the beginning of the titles, the sun, the earth, and the moon, which we reoriented, but this was a pivotal shot. Asteroids flying by, or meteorites, whatever you want to call them. They're in 2001. Jupiter, Jupiter's moons. And this was something I just loved, this kind of traveling through the edge of a galaxy and all these stardust lanes of stars and galactic dust actually got me going on the whole Stargate for 2001. I thought this was so beautiful that we could do something kind of like this. So anyway, along comes MGM. They give the money to Stanley to make 2001. And 2001 was not successful when it first came out, as you might remember. It was a dog. No one liked it. It got horrible reviews. Kubrick cut about 17 minutes out of the movie. And then at about 30 days into the release, when the studio was about to pull the film, a few youngsters started showing up in the front row smoking dope, and the Ultimate Trip got relabeled, and the movie really took off. So working with Stanley Kubrick was just an incredibly great experience. He was a wonderful, wonderful guy, very, very intelligent man, very demanding, very high quality control. You can see our little control room here where we have all our storyboards for the movie. Kubrick at his camera, Arthur Clarke in the pod bay. You see how dated these graphics are. Arthur and Stanley, that's unfortunately what killed Stanley, smoking. There's me, cute as a bug, and Con Pedersen in our little control room here. Con really ran this whole thing. He was a master at the organization of all of the thousands of film elements that had to be composited to make all these magic come together. And there he is in our little control room. This is very early on in the film when we really don't have all these boards filled up, but believe me, we filled a whole room with these folding boards of storyboards and planning. Here's me. Working on, this was the first miniature that came out of this fiberglass shop, and we had to figure out this whole technique that we called Ernie's. I don't know where that Ernie's came from, but the whole idea of stealing little pieces off of German army tank kits and sticking them on and then painting them and then airbrushing it and putting a lot of detail on the miniatures to create what looked like full-scale stuff. Here's Stanley with one of the illustrations that Robert McCall, who just recently died, very good old friend of mine, did these illustrations. And here is Tony Masters, the production designer, art director for the movie, a really incredibly gifted guy who is also no longer with us. That's a blank slide. I'm going to show this a little bit out of order. There's really no orderly way to show 2001 because the Dawn of Man sequence, which is at the beginning of the movie, was actually shot at the end of the movie. It was the last thing we shot. But, here's location scouting in Africa. Keith Hampshire, very young, fresh, still photographer who went on location to get these plates of Africa because Kubrick didn't want to go there. And then the whole Dawn of Man sequence where we're on a set, And this is what's being projected of plates that were shot in Africa, and this is all a full-scale set. And obviously, I'm going to show you a little documentary about the making of these costumes for the Dawn of Man sequence. But there's all these shots with really completely photorealistic skies and completely synthetic rocks. And these poor guys in these ape suits under lights that are so hot that they're sweating, and they get really gnarly. But, you know, these are kind of an example of a typical storyboard we'd have to show, well, this is what we're going to build in the foreground, and this is what we're going to project in the background. Stuff that we were unable to do. Nobody could really find or build a proper carcass of a dinosaur, so that didn't make it into the movie. But then these models were built to kind of debug the whole thing. Again, with this being the projection screen out here, and these little model guys are going to represent this, and then the design for all the rocks and the little watering hole. And because the front projection machine, I'm not going to explain it in too great a depth, it'll come up a little bit later. This machine is so heavy, the camera, the projector, the lamp, the 8x10 plates, the glass, everything weighed a couple of thousand pounds. And the screen, which was the entire length of the end of the stage, was so cumbersome that they had to rotate the set instead of moving the camera. So the entire set was built on a huge turntable. So if you can imagine getting all your different camera angles sort of the left or the middle or the right by actually moving the entire set. Not an easy task. So there's this kind of study models that we were doing. Here's a poor guy that's sweating like a pig. And I asked Dan Richter, why was he so wet? And he said, I was just sweating. This came up much later in the movie, this whole idea of the monolith and these kind of cosmic alignments of the sun and the earth or the moon. And I'll explain that more a little bit later. So just for a moment, I'd like to talk a little bit about Cinerama and what this kind of thing would look like in 70 millimeter on a Cinerama screen. Now this screen is masked down a little bit for my show, but it's just video and, you know, very doopy, low quality digital files. When this screen is fully open, I've been told this is about a 40-foot screen, and this is where 2001 will be screened, which is going to look spectacular because the 70 millimeter print is really good. But you have to keep in mind that when this movie was made and what it was made for and the way it was exhibited, the screen was 90 feet wide and 45. It was taller than this screen is wide, and it was deeply curved, and so it wrapped around the audience. That in itself creates a completely different subjective experience for the audience. So I just want to remind you that I apologize for the quality of this, but that's what this whole thing is about, and it's what my career got to be about. So I'll go on to another couple more scenes, and we'll get into some more behind-the-scenes stuff. And I'll keep talking during some of this stuff now. So this is the famous floating pen, weightless pen. This little pen right here is actually on a giant rotating sheet of glass. And when she plucks it off, you'll see it sticks just a little tiny bit. There's a little double-sided tape on there. Boing. She's not really weightless. He's holding his arm up. You know, that kind of thing. So we get into that scene you just saw. Now here's, you know, before the shooting, there's obviously a guy out there. These are 3 16 millimeter movies. One of my first jobs in this movie was making all these fake computer readouts. We had to predict what we thought digital computer readouts would look like in shape and form and content. So there's 3 here, and there's 2 more up here, and then there's just little lights behind here. But all these shots had to be done in a very clever way so that the actors would actually, their heads would never cross the window frame because we had no traveling mats or anything. So you'll see all the shots inside cockpits and things like that. The actors are very carefully placed off at the edge so that we could just cut the window out and place another image in the window and not have to have a traveling mat. But here's our little 16 millimeter Bell & Howell projectors making these movies that are projected into these screens inside the set. That's Stanley. So here's the screens. Like, this is a cool little multiplane thing that I figured out how to do because we shot all these in 35 millimeter. So that was just one rectangular shape, which I'll show you later, photographed over and over and over with the zoom lens positioned slightly differently. Even though the gizmo rotated automatically, I just took the camera drive motor, took a shaft out of it, put some gears and cams, and moved the artwork around in front of the camera, and then just changed the sync between the two to get some of these clever little multiplane things. And then here's Stanley's favorite camera rig, the big rotating camera rig. That's Stanley on the right. You can see that's a really cumbersome camera, and the rig itself is huge, And it's all sitting on this poor little head down here that's got to take all that weight. And so this is what one of those pieces of readout artwork would look like. We found all these in the Kubrick archives. And my friend Dave Larson is doing a beautiful coffee table book on the making of 2001. So you're going to see a lot of this stuff finally in print after 45 years. This is another thing that we were doing throughout the production, which was Polaroid photographs of every set and every object pasted together. So this is a pasted shot of the Orion, pasted into the opening on the space station. And this is a frame clip of one of the movies. And that's a little 35 millimeter movie there. There's a 35 millimeter movie there. There's another 35 movie there and another one there, upside down. All little rear projected movies in all the sets to create a sense of scale. This is the Orion spacecraft being built with not so much Ernie's because it had to be really smooth. But you can see all the subtle little shadings on the surface to try to give it a sense of scale. And then this was one of the cutouts of a photograph of the Orion that would be put onto a giant sheet of glass for photography, and then we'd cut out the windows and put little movies in the windows. So here's the Orion, you know, on a mount. Here's a steel mount that's wrapped in black velvet, just some work in process. This is more of a finished shot in color film of what that miniature looks like. Here's the inside of the set. Every one of these seats supposedly had the capability to have a movie at your seat. Revolutionary idea at the time. I actually got a call from somebody a few years later asking me if Kubrick had patented that idea because they wanted to do it. So here's some of the sets under construction. See a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. This was a very clever technique that was used throughout the film of wrapping kind of vinyl naugahyde on foam rubber to create these padded interiors. The weightless pen was a big deal too. It was Parker Pen Company collaborated with NASA and with us and made these pens that actually would draw if they were in weightless condition. So I'll show you some of the interior and exterior of this set under construction. These panels up here are very similar to the panels you're going to see at the end of the film on the floor of that weird room. But this was a huge curved set. That out there is a big rotating painting out the window. So this is what the space station looked like. This was a miniature that was about roughly 10 feet in diameter. I can't remember exactly. But it was super detailed, and it had quartz lights all around. It was lit up inside. It was detailed inside and out. It was a beautifully built and beautifully photographed miniature. And throughout the movie, we were seeing 35 millimeter dailies that were anamorphically squeezed horizontally 2-to-1. We never saw 70 millimeter prints at any time during production. But Dave Larson has been taking these from the Kubrick archives and correcting the color and then stretching them back out to get back to the 70 millimeter aspect ratio. So we're going to be able to restore a lot of these frame clips that came from the Kubrick archives of almost every shot in the movie. So you have these kind of shots where this big painting was rotating outside. I think this Macy's scene may have gotten cut out of the movie, but it's in the outtakes, where he orders a bush baby for his child. Here's the outside of the set. This was one of the first things I saw when I came onto the production. This was already kind of underway when we started doing the visual effects. And there's the outside of that set, and there's the big rotating Earth in this rotating disc rig. Here's the inside of the set under construction. Kubrick on the set finished, getting ready to shoot. He was always very wary of any other still photographer. But he always had his Polaroid camera. We just shot thousands and thousands of Polaroids of everything. He couldn't frame a shot unless he could see a print of it. So he shot Polaroids and then would draw the framing that he wanted to tell the cameraman what he wanted to see in the 65 millimeter camera here. That's Jeffrey Unsworth, the cinematographer. Gary Lockwood looking at a Polaroid. And then this is the space station set shooting. More of that. Old microphone boom. Very little used these days, except on television shows. The giant camera. Testing a spacesuit, kind of incongruous to be on the space station in a spacesuit, but, wardrobes were brought in during the day when other shooting was stalled for some reason or another. I'm going to show you a little bit of the Ares. This is a big cutout of a model with movies projected in, and this is a movie that Kubrick produced himself. Nothing happened in this movie that he didn't have some hand in. I'll show you a little bit more of that in a minute. That's the famous rotating camera rig. The moon positioned very carefully, never to cross anybody's field of view. Tom Hanks has the zero-gravity toilet instructions at his bathroom in Santa Monica. So you see a little movie up here? That's what gives us a little movies there and there. That's what gives this scale. But that's actually a flat cutout photograph, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. So here's the guys with their heads carefully positioned out of the frame. This is one of the only front projection shots that's not in the Dawn of Man sequence. Little movies being projected down here, all around that set. Movie being projected here, here, here. So I'll show you a little bit of the sets under construction for the Ares set. That's the floor of the Ares set. That's where the elevator fits right in the middle. Here's the set being constructed, the cockpit being constructed, the inside of the cockpit just prior to shooting with nothing on the screens yet. Here's Kubrick in the set, pretty close to photography on that day with some movies running now. A typical storyboard drawing of the inside of the Ares with the moon out the window. You just see some of our notes here. Seeing the moon seen through the windows, blues and blacks, but the stars have been cut out. One of the elements we decided to delete from that shot. Parts of the set. And then the ubiquitous Polaroids. Everything was tested in Polaroids, organized. And so all this stuff is now been found in the Kubrick archives. None of us knew that Kubrick had saved this stuff, and it's now at the College of Communications in London, and Dave got access to it. So we've got all this material now to build this book with. And this is one of the photographs of the Ares with the windows cut out so you could put movies in the windows. Here's the movie that Kubrick shot of the little karate scene that's projected for the stewardesses, the flight attendants now to be watching. This is a miniature of the moon base. And then here's the miniature of the moon base more finished. This was what we call a forced perspective miniature. This is probably 5 feet wide across the front, and maybe that's 20 feet wide across the back, but only about 15 feet from the back to the front. Everything is falling off, and all the little mountains are becoming smaller and smaller, and the granularity of the sand was refined finer and finer off toward the distance, because obviously we couldn't make a miniature that was miles deep. So here's the Ares under construction before the final paint job. There were a lot of different kinds of textured surfaces put on the miniature. So that's a photograph of the miniature, which is now going to be pasted on this big sheet of glass for photography, and I'll explain that in a minute. There's a miniature with the top half left off so that a movie could be projected down into it through mirrors, and so you could see a movie in these windows. That was the support gizmo that lowered down inside. Just wanted to show you that because we were in an era here. Everything in this movie is painted or sculpted or photographed mechanically. We had no computers, no computer graphics, no motion control, no nothing. We had to do it all pretty much by hand, and that led to Wally Vevers, who was one of the 4 effects supervisors with me, started building this thing we called the Sausage Factory. There's a camera here, the lens is right there, a double bipack magazine there on the top. It's on a carriage that's on this track that can run up and down. This is being photographed from the point of view where the artwork would be placed. There's a motor here that's driving a big lead screw to move this thing back and forth along this track with tremendous precision. And then there's this whole control console here. So there's the camera on the right with the bipack magazines and this special head, which I'll show you some more, and then this big gizmo here that's really interesting. And anybody could build one of these gizmos today. And it would actually work really well, and it would be a fraction of the cost of computer graphics. Very simple idea, and a friend of mine did these illustrations. You got one main motor here that drives a bunch of gearboxes that go through shafts to a Selson motor, and a Selson motor looks like a motor, and you have 5 wires that come down to its sister motor. So whatever rotation this does exactly the same. So you could change the ratios in all these gearboxes, and you could have one on the pan, one on the tilt, one on the track, one on the focus, and one actually driving the film through the camera at all different ratios so that you'd be able to exactly repeat a shot. So you could shoot a shot with all your planned moves and then run the camera back to the 0 point and run the film back to the 0 point and then do another exposure exactly the same way. That was the magic of our crude mechanical motion control at the time. So here's one of those Selson motors here driving a belt that's driving this lead screw that's going to move the glass on which the artwork is. Here's the camera with these bipack magazines, the lens, this head here with Selson motors doing the pan and the tilt. That's the magazine part of it, and I'll explain that a little bit better in a minute. And the head, you can see this incredible mechanical engineering at this time. And there's the whole camera rig, and then here's the bipack magazines, and here's the magazines with film. And the basic idea here is that you have 2 pieces of film entering the camera. One is a foreground piece of film, which is either a matte or a yellow cyan or magenta master. And the trick of the whole thing was that every piece of color film we shot in 65 millimeter original negative could then be separated into 3 yellow, cyan, or magenta, black and white, what we call masters. And those could then be printed with red, blue, and green filters back to a new negative. So that was the means of duplicating the film in those days. And since there were no optical printers that could do it, we had to do all that printing actually in the camera. So every shot you see in 2001 has been multiple exposures of 3 different pieces of film inside one camera. And the shooting ratio on 2001 is 200:1. So you can believe me, there was a lot of film went through this thing. So here's the basic idea for the sausage factory. You've got a track here. This is very schematic, but you've got your camera with your bipack magazine. You've got a big sheet of glass. You mount your model on there, and you can go up and down here under this control any number of times and repeat the movements exactly. So for one exposure, you could illuminate the pod or the Ares or any spacecraft from the front and leave the back black. That would be one exposure. Then you go back to frame 1, and then you light this with white and no light on there, and it creates a silhouette. So that white prints a piece of film that's in the camera of the moon background or the stars or whatever else is going to go into that shot. Has to be behind that spacecraft. So the spacecraft becomes a self-matting silhouette. Then, for another pass, you could have your little projector back here and project a little movie into the window, or any number of movies into the window. So you can imagine, for every one of those little windows, there's a 35 millimeter movie that had to be planned, shot, photographed at the right perspective, prepped, and designed to fit each model shot. It makes me tired thinking about it. I meet real astronomers and astrophysicists and astrobiologists in my work because I'm a space geek. They all love 2001. A lot of them got into their work because of 2001. I said, well, what about the whole alien thing? They said, well, let's not talk about that. This was a set that didn't make the cut. It was a huge concourse scene. It's kind of interesting because this is Stanley Kubrick's wife, Christiana, and one of the daughters. I'm not sure which one because she's facing away. But these 2 guys who you'll see in that conference room, these are the military guys who are watching this whole operation like a hawk. These are the guys that know all about aliens, or at least are trying to figure it out. and they know much more than anybody on the crew of the Discovery are ever going to be told. So don't get me started about UFOs. This is a very interesting set because it's all lit by the walls. And behind those walls are huge white rooms with lights bouncing into them. And here's the crew on that set. It's one of the themes throughout the film that the sets were designed to be self-illuminated. You see very little use of key lights, fill lights, or any other lighting. The lighting is actually built in as part of the set design. It was really masterful. That's Jeffrey Unsworth, the cinematographer. This is the big Cinerama brute. Stanley at his he loved this little camera. This was the only small hand-holdable Cinerama camera. And this is the outside of that set. The set is in this room. So these are these big white stretched plastic covers. And then outside is this whole other world of white light bouncing from outside. So this is like a giant diffusion enlarger. If you know anything about chemical photography, that's how you get perfectly even light, which Kubrick was completely fanatic about. Everybody having a smoking break. Kubrick never carried cigarettes. If you wanted to be his friend, carry cigarettes. So here's a little bit of universe out here.
No, the only thing we're sure of is it was very
Carefully positioned so his head never cuts across that window, because that was just a cutout. There wasn't any way to get an image out those windows, because this guy moves in front of them. We had no traveling mats. You'll see this, a similarity again to universe, lunar landscapes. And I'll show you something of a whole lunar landscape thing I was working on that got rejected. Here's a flat photograph with a 35 millimeter movie projected on it, photographed on glass. You see the perspective is not shifting at all. It's just moving in distance, but it's really not shifting in perspective because it's actually two-dimensional. I designed a lot of these lunar landscapes according to what Stanley wanted to have. I didn't believe there would be peaky mountains like that. I thought the moon would be much more rounded and soft and powdery, which in fact turned out to be the case. So these are our little fake computer graphics. And that shot of looking straight down on a model with holes drilled in it and lights behind it to create this sense of illumination. And then the landing pad was a shot that I did of the moon bus landing on the pad. Again, using a lot of lights, a lot of very bright each one of those is a 1,000-watt projector lamp to try to get this glow, because we were shooting at about 72 frames a second. There are air nozzles in there coming out, disturbing dust that's been placed on the pad. And there's a rod behind the moon bus supporting it. And there's a foreground set and that set are shot separately as that shot separately. So they all have to be composited together. This is a typical storyboard. You know, we didn't go overboard on storyboard detail, but it kind of shows the basic essence of that shot. There's me working on the moon bus again. I don't know why I put that in there. I thought I showed you that already. But here's the moon bus on that little set with 1,000-watt lights around. This is a painting back here, and there's this rod that's supporting the moon bus that's also supplying it with lights and with nitrogen air to blow dust that was here to create it. We couldn't figure out how to do rocket flames. We just could not make a credible rocket flame, so we just said no rocket flames. So that's that little down shot of the moon base there. It's a still photograph of a model with holes drilled in it and lights behind. Don't I look good? Another shot, still photograph with a movie projected behind. And here's what that movie is like before it's projected. So we had to figure out the perspective of the shot and shoot a live action shot of the pilots without the foreground part of the set in order to fit it in there. A lot of airbrush painting on that. Was my first job on the models, was painting the outside of these miniatures. Typical exposure test on pulling the mat. And here is the space station on the left and the moon bus interior on the right. set construction on the same stage. Now here's one of the moon terrains, which were forced perspective miniatures and shot with 4x5 positive negative Polaroid film. We found the Polaroid film was actually the finest grain 4x5 film we could get, and you could peel it apart and get a negative on one side and a print on the other. It was a really cool film. And then we'd make big 18x24 blow-ups, and then I would airbrush colored dyes on the blow-ups and fit them together, and we would shoot them on the animation stand as flat artwork. It's a typical composite of the moon bus and one miniature, just to kind of experiment with various angles. Here's one of the terrains with nothing else in it. That's, believe it or not, an early moon bus before anybody had figured out the design. This was one of Roy Carnan's illustrations from way before any of the real hotshot NASA-type engineers came on board that were proteges of Wernher von Braun. This is a shot that didn't make the cut in the movie, but there's actually a little moon. I forgot about this shot. There's a little moon bus there flying over the moon. And this is a 2-to-1 compressed anamorphic print like we would see on a daily basis. And here's me at one of my lunar models that I built this huge clay model on the stage of my take on what I thought the moon surface would look like. And it was really cool. We've somehow lost all the photographs I shot of this. And I made all these little micrometeor craters all over it, just billions of craters, by going 40 feet up in the stage ceiling and dropping paint and goop down onto it. And they just made zillions of craters effortlessly. It was really fun, but it didn't make the cut. So here's the moon base. One of the stories about this is this was a big set at the Shepperton Studios, the one big shoot that was not at the Bournemouth Studios. A big lock-off shot where the camera is fastened to the wall up in the ceiling of the stage. And then this miniature is added to this photography a year later. So this was shot over and over and over, and a few of the takes were developed at the lab, but a few were held in a freezer, undeveloped, so that we could add this other stuff to it later. So we had to mark in the gate of the camera where the gate aligned, what perforations were being engaged by the pins in the camera, so that a year later we could load it back into the camera and have perfect alignment. This is the great touch shot that kind of matches the Australopithecus doing the same thing, and the big signal. The design for this scene was that the reason this monolith goes off and sends this signal was that for the first time in its history, the sun comes up, because it's been buried. It's just like a photo alarm. We could never figure out how to show the sun coming up over this monolith set. There was just no way to do it, to get shadows to change and to move a giant arc light or anything and get anything like that. So that was just avoided, and Kubrick later came up with this symmetrical shot, this kind of monolith, Earth, sun symmetry that symbolized the moment when something would happen. This is a typical shot of one of the miniatures before it was superimposed with the set. Another shot like that, an anamorphically squeezed shot. And then here's the stage at Shepperton Studios of the TMA-1 excavation, with all these big soft lights up in the ceiling. This is actually this stage floor. It's not a pit in the ground or anything. These big fiberglass panels were used to make this hold back walls. And then Stanley, again, used this very clever idea of extremely bright lights into the camera to obscure your ability to see stars or anything up here. Very careful camera framing so that you really wouldn't need stars. Except in shots like this, we did add stars. If they held still long enough, we could sprinkle a few stars in a shot like that. And this is production underway. That's Kubrick down there. Kubrick did some of this photography himself, hand-holding the 65mm camera. This is one of the cameras. This got the Cinerama logo on it that you saw a little earlier. This was the big main camera. And here's the little the miniature camera that only held 400 feet of film and was light enough to be handheld, and Kubrick actually shot some of the stuff himself. There he is, holding that camera. And can't remember this guy's name, the first AD, is talking in a microphone to this guy because he's got headphones and a radio. One of Bob McCall's early illustrations, the whole idea of the publicity campaign. Saul Bass started designing graphics for the titles, which were actually never used. Now, people ask me all the time, what would you do now? We're in the age of computer graphics and CGI, blah, blah, blah. What would you do differently if you had to make 2001 now versus then? I would still do much of this the same way. I don't know of any computer graphics algorithm that can create the kind of photorealism that a lot of these miniatures produced on the camera. So whether it's this or Blade Runner or the Mothership or any of the other things I've done, I would still do many of them as miniatures, although I'd use digital compositing techniques to put them together rather than all this horrendously laborious printing we had to do in 2001. Here's a very early illustration. That is the Discovery spacecraft. You can see there's the 3 pod doors there. That is a pod, believe it or not, and that's a pod. And there were all kinds of crazy designs for what the spacecraft was going to look like. There were early designs where these rings were all along the length of the spacecraft, and these big radiating panels that we tried to build that were going to supposedly radiate the heat from this giant nuclear plasma engine. It never came to pass. So you'll see some transformation of this miniature over time. And little mock-ups like this of this scene where Keir or Gary is going to get out of the pod, go down to the pod and service the antenna. It's a very early little working study. Here's the small miniature of the Discovery on the early stage of construction. There were 2 versions. One was 15 feet long for long shots, and one was 54 feet long for the close-ups. So you see some Ernies being put on here, mostly by art students, local art students. We had huge teams of 24-hour teams pasting junk on the outside of the spacecraft. And then all this outer ring and these rods and all this stuff is going to be eliminated. Here's the main ball of Discovery before it was painted with all these different kinds of surfaces and designs and the pod bays. Here's one of the only photographs we've been able to find. There's almost nothing of the Discovery being shot on the stage. So we found this old Polaroid that's got all these chemical blotches on it. But it does show a man and a miniature pod and the Discovery and this kind of cradle supporting the spacecraft for a close-up shot. And now, by now, all these rings have been removed, and you've seen this kind of transformation of the spacecraft. And then this was a design for a shot, and then this is the actual cutout photograph that would be used in certain shots where the perspective's not changing. Typical storyboard, we had to use old Xerox copiers, and we'd use a fine-tooth grid on it because it was just black or white, so we could create a kind of a fake grayscale. So I'm going to talk about the centrifuge in a minute. Okay, here's the construction beginning on the centrifuge, the Vickers framework, these big pylons on both sides, and this big shaft running across here with this hub tunnel. Set construction pieces on the stage being built for the centrifuge, prepping pieces for the set, more pieces for the set, the famous ladder that Keir and Gary climb up and down, the hibernaculums being constructed that have the rotating lids. I don't think you ever actually see them open or close in the movie, but they did. This is the centrifuge nearing completion before the installation of the sets. And now here the sets are installed on the centrifuge and the lights are installed. And you see these big ducts up here that are for cooling, to get cool air conditioning coming in through all these little ducts to try to cool down the inside of the set, which would get extremely hot with tens of thousands of watts of light. And one of the big problems we had with this was that this rotating set rotated all of the lights and all the projectors for the HAL readouts 360 degrees over and over and over. Believe me, they're not designed to do that. So they would just blow up. So it was a complete hard hat area. You couldn't go anywhere near it when it was moving because things would be falling off constantly. These little doors would open 360 degrees around both sides of the set. The set is really in two halves. So you could open these doors on either side, climb into the set, and set up a shot. There's Stanley inside the set, very happy man, smoking. And here's one of the few shots I found. These, what do you think those are? Our iPads. How prescient. They're actually 35 millimeter movies being projected in a hole in the table, but they look like iPads, and I thought that was really pretty cool that Kubrick thought that an electronic media like this would actually be page-sized, vertical page-size, rather than widescreen movie size or television size. So that's Wally Vevers, who was really the genius behind all the mechanical effects and engineering on the movie. Jeff Unsworth, the director of photography, that's me, that's Stanley. And this rig right back behind this grip guy is one of the camera rigs for moving the camera inside the centrifuge, and I'll explain that in a minute. This is the fisheye lens, very similar to the fisheye lens that we used in How the West Was Won for shooting these extreme wide-angle shots. The 2001 is filled with fisheye shots. But the sets are so curvy and distorted, you really don't see them as fisheye shots. You don't see them as distorted shots. But it was a really cool way to get a sense of space and scale in sets that really were kind of claustrophobic. Here's, typical shooting inside. They're probably doing some scene with Hal, sitting around with camera, Polaroids, studying everything. This is the guy that actually had this joystick that ran the centrifuge clockwise or counterclockwise at whatever speed, and he had a closed-circuit television feed from inside there. So here's one of the shots of Gary Lockwood. You can see this very thin little gap right here where that joint goes between these alternating doors. And that was the way we could get a very thin piece of metal to support the camera. This particular camera shot, the cameraman is in a kind of a Ferris wheel seat trying to stay upright while he tilts the camera 360 degrees to follow Gary. Gary's really, on a treadmill on the bottom of the set while the whole set is rotating around him. This was an extremely visionary thing to try to do. It's never been done before or since. Now here the camera's on a little rolling dolly, and it's being supported by a very thin blade of metal through that little gap in the floor. And Gary had to actually turn the camera on and off himself because there was nobody in there. You can see all this lighting that's built into the set. Everything is lit itself. There are no key lights, no fill lights, no crew. This set has to look pretty good all the time when you turn it on. So here's the camera rig. This is the Kelvin Pike, the cameraman. He's sitting in a kind of a Ferris wheel seat that has a bearing behind it. It's rotating on that axis right there. So he can go 360 degrees. The camera is down here on its own bearing rig, and he can rotate this camera 360 degrees. And there's a closed-circuit television monitor, and he's got a little monitor there. He can see what he's shooting. And then Kubrick, who's outside the set, can also see what he's shooting. So this is what Kelvin sees on his monitor. Here's his wheel to rotate the camera 360 degrees upside down. And here's Stanley, who often played music during scenes like this. There was no dialogue, and we're not recording sound, but he wanted to create a mood, and so he would play records. This was the era of, I guess, 33 RPM. And here's that little dolly rig with the fisheye lens up here, the television camera, wheels, and a little blade that's sticking through that very thin opening in the floor. Here's the crew. Again, that blade would fit right through that opening and keep this camera in position, either in front of or behind Gary while he runs around. Very scary stuff. This whole thing fell over once, scared everybody to death. It was very dangerous shooting in there. So inside what was called the hub tunnel, this is another clever set where the foreground part of this set is fixed right now while the background part of the set is rotating. And as Keir and Gary step across, the foreground part of the set starts to rotate and the background part of the set stops rotating. But they had to step across together. And so getting the coordination of the motors to slow down and speed up so that you didn't notice that anything happened was pretty clever. And the lights are moving with the set. The camera is fixed to the set. And it was a pretty clever illusion, which was all part of this kind of weightless theme that pervaded the movie. So that's the outside of that set. Jeff Unsworth there. There's only a couple of photographs of this thing extant, but that was a complete rotating set. So we're going to get to Hal now. So these are all 16 millimeter rear projected movies. And the one you just saw there was a movie of a movie.
In many ways, perhaps the greatest responsibility of any single mission element. You're the brain and central nervous system of the ship, and your responsibilities include watching over the men in hibernation. Does this ever cause you any...
Now, a lot of these readouts I made by stealing graphs and things out of Scientific American and all kinds of scientific journals, and I would Xerox them, turn them black and white, put my own colors on them, and jiggle them all together. And I subsequently heard from some scientists who said, I wrote that article. And they saw their stuff. They could actually recognize their stuff. This is Con Pedersen at the animation camera. We built this animation camera. It was a 35 millimeter Bell & Howell camera with a zoom lens. But you see a bunch of other little shafts and stuff around the zoom lens because the motor on the camera went to a shaft that went to some gears and actually came down here and started rotating things down here. So there was sync between the camera and the artwork. And that allowed us to do a lot of those moving, rotating readouts. But we used an IBM Selectric typewriter, just made a zillion of this gobbledygook computer graphics and flashed it and moved it around. And here's some of the stuff that we stole out of Scientific American. I have no idea what that means, but it looks good. Oh, look at that. Oh, that's DNA, I'm sure. This is one of those readouts I showed you that was kind of stacked up. This is the same piece of artwork photographed multiple times. And we're going to get into the pod bay now. Quite an improvement on that early pod that we did at Graphic Films. There was a production designer that worked with the whole crew. His name was Harry Lange, and he was an actual spacecraft designer that worked under Wernher von Braun. And so it was he who really brought the kind of verisimilitude to all the designs that, you know, all these things made sense. There were little vernier nozzles here, there were lights, there were hydraulics, there were pressurized chambers. I mean, everything made technical sense. So any aeronautical engineer could look at this stuff and say, well, that works pretty good. There's a little movie up there of Keir in the cockpit. More 16 millimeter movies. Rear projected inside the pod. This is shot with a fisheye lens, by the way. That's a miniature pod about 1 foot in diameter. You can get a replica of this pretty soon. I know a guy's building them. They're really cool. And a little movie being projected of, I think of this scene, it's Gary Lockwood waiting for Keir. So you get a real nice sense of interactive lighting because that pod is actually shining on that model. There's lighting, interactive lighting was really important everywhere. So here's the pod bay set from the outside with 2 of the pods in place. Here's with 1 pod in place, so you can kind of get a feeling for the size of the thing and all this lighting that was underneath that shines up through the walls, lights built into the ceiling. You could shoot anywhere in this set without a key light or a fill light. It just lit itself up once it was turned on. It's really beautiful. There's Stanley with his Polaroid. People have asked me, why is Gary leaning on this if he's weightless? So I can't answer that. This was the pod, this was the interior pod set, so it's not finished on the outside, it's finished on the inside. They were never one and the same. So this is the famous scene where Keir and Gary are in there talking to each other, and there's a movie of Hal's readout, and that's Hal's eye right there, seen from the backside, which was a Nikon 8mm fisheye lens with a light inside of it. That's one of the pods under construction in an early fiberglass phase before detailing and painting. Here's the pod set when Keir comes back after Hal's been a bad boy. Or actually, he's about to go out in this scene. Shooting on the pod bay set. One of our little Xeroxes of a shot. We ended up not doing any shots where you could see Keir or Gary in the windows when the pod was outside. It just didn't seem to look right. So anything that didn't look right was better not to happen at all than to try it and have it look odd. So there were things that we just felt we'll do without.
Just a moment. Just a moment. I've just picked up a fault in the AE-35 unit. It's
Now here's
going to
more
be
computer
100%
graphics here.
Failure within 72 hours.
It's still within operational limits right now.
Yes, and it will stay that way until it fails.
So you remember in the early days of computer graphics, we had what was called vector graphics, or sometimes called wireframe graphics, before anybody could make shaders or polygons. They were just lines. And so it was called wireframe in the early days. So I figured, well, wireframe. So I built that antenna out of wire, soldered it together, built it in my office. Here's the plans for the antenna, and I just built it up, painted it white, photographed it in my office from a zillion different angles, pasted them up and on the animation stand and animated this antenna. Pretty simple way to go. Thanks. So for a shot like this would have been a full-scale pod shot separately from the 54-foot miniature of the Discovery spacecraft, 2 different shots. Because it's video, you can't see all the little stars back there. But now we're looking straight up into the ceiling of the stage with black velvet in the ceiling. And Keir is actually being lowered on wires directly toward the camera. So seems to be floating weightlessly because there's no particular up or down. But if you linger on these shots too long, you can see the shadows of the wires here. And then this is a 70 millimeter movie projected onto a little white piece of cardboard, and that gets photographed by another motion control rig to reposition that little movie in space to fit the shot. So here's just a shot from up on the scaffold of the pod mounted on the ceiling. This is Gary. This is the Gary stuntman on wires. This is on solid supports, and the camera's down on the floor here. And all these shots that had to be moving objects like an articulated human being or a spacecraft, we had a thing we call the blob department because we had no way to make traveling mats. So we designed this technique of making these 70 millimeter movies of the scenes with the stars superimposed and then these reticles superimposed and the frame number superimposed. And then they would hand paint little black blobs all around the guy, 1 frame at a time. And that would be shot as a movie, an animated film on the animation stand, and that would be used as a mat in the composite of the shots so that stars wouldn't be superimposed over a spacecraft or a person or whatever. And there was a department of about 30 people with enlargers projecting onto little pallets with animation tables on them with pin registration that had to line these things up by hand. It's one of the little models of the pod and, you know, kind of planning out this whole scene of retrieving Gary's body, planning that shot. Gary not too comfortable doing a little rehearsal, but you can see the wires here. This is Keir doing his shot with the AE-35 gizmo. Now this next shot is an animated X-ray. This was the AE-35 unit they were studying was actually a gyroscope out of an aircraft. And I built a little rig, mounted on the rig, put 150 different increments on it, sent it out to an X-ray lab that photographed 150 X-rays of it from all these calculated angles, brought the X-rays in, registered them together, shot them on the animation stand. This wouldn't pass muster today, you know, because we're in the world of integrated circuits. This was just a little bit dates the movie. But it's a rear projected 35 millimeter movie, animated. But why are they leaning? So here's shooting that scene. Had to kind of remove part of the set up here in order to get those down shots of him testing the machine. Here's my little wireframe readout that you saw of that device. Pretty crude, but effective. I frankly don't know what's next. Oh yeah. These are now, when Kira has his helmet off, Kubrick took these projectors that are projecting these readouts and took the screens out and projected the movies right onto his face. It's really a beautiful effect throughout the movie. It's used several times. So you see the images actually projected onto him slightly out of focus. This was shot looking straight up into the ceiling of the stage with that stuntman at about 72 frames a second to get slow-mo. This is the poor stuntman. He was, I can't remember his name right now, but he was kind of a European mercenary soldier guy who would do anything. And so he didn't mind being hung upside down in a spacesuit with an oxygen bottle for hours on end. And he just said, if I go limp, that means the oxygen ran out, so please lower me down. But he was really great. He was a real trooper. Kubrick had an idea very early in the film that he could save a lot of money by using a midget and build all the exterior sets half scale. I mean, he was really serious about that. A lot of midgets were interviewed and looked at. Children were interviewed and looked at for scale, and you know, didn't work. So you remember the scene where Kira he decides to blow himself into the emergency hatch with no air and no helmet. Arthur Clarke said this was a big mistake. You should never hold your breath if you're going to try that. But Kira did his own stunt here. He was on a single wire, dropping toward the camera. And if the wire broke and he fell, he would just fall right on top of the camera from about 30 feet up. It's a pretty scary little scene. Here's Kira doing it. That's the set. Anyway, I'm going to keep moving on here because we're kind of running out of time. This is one of the handheld shots that I think Kubrick may have shot himself. I love this scene. This is an interesting 180-degree camera rotation where up becomes down and down becomes up.
I know everything hasn't been quite right with me, but I can assure you now, very confidently, that it's going to be all right again. I feel much better now. I really do. Look, Dave.
These sets were amazingly meticulously made. Everything was finished. You could shoot 360 degrees and everything was finished perfectly.
I honestly think you ought to sit down calmly, take a stress pill and think things over.
So now he's going to become weightless again, strangely, where the set is mounted up on its end. So now we're looking straight up again. That set's vertical. And he does another big weightless scene there from a lot of different angles, which I'll show you a few more shots of later. I'm going to move on a little bit because here's the set. I'm not going to dwell on it. It's not a very complicated thing. There's a lot of stuff with the stuntman doing rehearsals, the crew getting him ready, lighting the set. Stanley loved these little guys coming out here on little motors for Hal's memory ejection. But I'm going to get on to some of the... you're going to see this movie again. So I'm going to move on to some of the more effect stuff. This monolith was a miniature made out of wood and very carefully polished and finished. All the surfaces of the monolith was painted with this ground up pencil graphite to get this very beautiful metallic kind of soft sheen. This is shot on the animation stand. That's my Jupiter there, Jupiter's moons. The sun is about a about an inch diameter hole in some cardboard with a very bright light behind it. All the stars in the movie were painted by me by spattering white paint on black paper. There's another 70 millimeter movie being superimposed into the scene. So this was shot as a lock-off movie and then added to this shot as the camera pans across to reveal the discovery and the monolith. The monolith, did I say the monolith was about 4 feet long? Here's some early designs, again, back to Roy Carnan. That was, believe it or not, a pod. And this was the aperture that was going to take them to another dimension, that was going to be a hole in one of Jupiter's moons. That was a couple of pods right there. There was an early draft of the movie that had Keir and Gary each in pods going into this other dimension. And when I told Stanley I thought he ought to kill them all off, he threw me out of his office. It's an early design of the Discovery, but you can see the pod bays and the cockpit, but this was a whole other design. I'll show you some more stuff later. I'm showing the Earth now because the Earth was a flat painting painted on glass, and we just barely got enough success with the clouds on Earth to make it just barely pass, because there were no photographs of Earth from space. But Jupiter was even a worse problem, because how could we make Jupiter look truly round? So that's one of the little things I'm going to show you. This was one of my first weird experiments. Now, this is a fisheye shot, so it's very distorted. These are actually straight rods right here. But there's a bearing right here, a little shaft coming up, a little black ball that rotates. And on the edge of that black ball is a little piece of white tape. And over here is a projector that's projecting an image onto this white tape. And you'll see that the artwork I put in this little opaque projector can rotate. And the shaft that's driving the rotation is this shaft that's coming over here. It comes down to a little motor, to some gears, and it goes over to this. So the whole gizmo rotates together. And I put it in a darkened room, open the shutter on the camera, and rotate it 360 degrees with the shutter open. You start getting these kind of stretched photographs. And this was my first attempt at trying to make a spherical planet from flat artwork. So I was doing these experiments to figure out, well, what angles could we get? Could we actually even out the exposure? How would we solve all these problems? And I kept, changing patterns and things. I felt, okay, this is going to work. And then Kubrick authorized me to build the Jupiter machine, which was this monster device. And so you now see this semicircular white piece of tape right there. It's on a shaft that's vertical right here. There's a disc right here with a little motor that I'm playing with. And then there's a projector here and a projector here. And then out here are 8x10 film cameras taking time exposures of this whole thing rotating. Here's two 8x10 cameras. Here's the gizmo, the Jupiter machine in another position. And this is kind of a diagram of what that all is. So you can see that by having this semicircular slit with images projected from these projectors, and the images are rotating paintings. And as this thing goes 360 degrees, it's going to create a sphere. Now I had to design the projectors and the optics and the lamps and the condenser lenses and a little slit inside and the artwork that would rotate inside the projector using a Selson motor to synchronize it. So there would be a painting I would make that half the painting would be the northern hemisphere of Jupiter. The other half of the painting would be the southern hemisphere of Jupiter, and they'd be joined with a little blurry line between right about at the equator. So I made this painting, this being the lower half of Jupiter, this being the upper half of Jupiter, these being the two poles, and this being the equator where the color would be the same, where it would join together. And I cut that painting apart into two halves, make ectochrome transparencies, and stick them in the projectors. So then when the whole thing rotates, and this is one of my exposure tests, it starts to become a sphere. You can see 16, 32, 45, 64. These are F numbers on the ectochrome projector to try to find out the right exposure, because this would take several hours to make one Jupiter photograph. You can see the camera got jiggled between each exposure here because I was taking the lens cap on and off. And there's Jupiter as one contiguous exposure from one of the angles. And it wasn't half bad. And then I would do some painting on it. That's the big red spot that was one half of my painting. And then here's some frame clips of various and sundry multiple zillions of shots we did of Jupiter and the sun and the stars that never made it into the movie. We tried everything. Here's one of Jupiter's moons. I did this by painting directly onto little glass slides, projecting the glass slides onto a hemisphere of white plastic, photographing that, and then airbrushing the Terminator on so you'd have the back side of the moon, the front side of the moon. These actually look like Jupiter's moons. I'm really proud of how this looks. If you ever see any real astronomical photographs from some of the space probes, we did pretty well. So I'll show you a little sequence that gets you into the Stargate. It was a big challenge on this movie to figure out how to transport this astronaut in time and in space to another dimension. Well, I don't know how many acid trips you have to figure that out, but that won't get you there. And the crew working on the film had tried all kinds of weird gizmos, and this was one thing I came up with, which is called the slit-scan machine that I built with Stanley's approval to do the Stargate. I'll explain it as we go on, but I just want to show you this little sequence that gets you into it, which was a very abstract transition. There was no longer going to be a slot in one of Jupiter's moons, no physicality to it at all. But you start with this shot, which is very much a crucifix with the monolith across the top there, all the Jupiter's moons lined up. It's all perfectly symmetrical again. This big symmetry is a very important symbol to you that the big moment is coming. The monolith just disappears. Camera tilts up to the stars. You can't see the stars here because they don't hold up on a QuickTime movie. But believe me, there's stars there. And then out of the stars start coming star-like lights that are dimensional coming at you that we did on the slit-scan machine. And then the stars fade out. And suddenly, you just slowly make this transition into another dimension. Then there's this shot of Keir where he's being jiggled by a couple of grips. Camera starts at 24 frames a second, and then as the camera ramps down to about 1 frame a second, they're compensating the exposure by closing the iris so that the exposure is constant. But now this is kind of symbolic of the transition in time as well. It becomes like a time-lapse shot where he becomes kind of blurred energy rather than a normal human being. We tried many shots of actually trying to put the pod into the Stargate and having reverse shots of Keir looking out the window at the Stargate and all the kind of typical movie conventions of the day, which all got cut out. And it's all part of this theme I'm talking about of movies that are as immersive as this can become a first-person experience for the audience. You no longer have to have the reverses, the cuts, the over-the-shoulders, and the normal movie conventions of like a normal action sequence. You take the point of view of the character. Anyway, this was the early Stargate that didn't happen. Some of the moire patterns that were tried. This was the animation stand. I stuck it in there because there's no place else to put it, but it's a 65 millimeter Oxbury animation camera shooting this platform. I don't have any good photographs of it, but that's where all the action took place. All the stars, planets, moons, lunar terrains, and everything were photographed on this 65 millimeter camera stand. So I designed this big machine called the slit-scan machine. Here's Roy Naisbitt starting to prepare some of the artwork for it. This is the center of the artwork right here where most of the detail is. Out here on the edges where the camera can't see very well. The camera's going to get very close to this center part, and I'll explain that in a minute. Of this abstract art, which was a zillion black and white high contrast photos we took of op art, electron microscope photographs, zipatone patterns, any kind of shape, size, or texture we could get our hands on that we could paste up and make these abstract patterns of light and color. So you can see a little bit of the artwork being prepared down here of just these abstract patterns. And then here's the machine. I don't have great photographs of this machine, but nevertheless, this is all I've got. There's 2 slits here, one for the right wall and one for the left wall. The 65 millimeter camera is here. I made my little focus gizmo here that would automatically focus the lens as it moved closer and farther from the slit. And behind that slit is that artwork. And over here is my little control box, which looks like this. It was actually, in real complexity, probably as complicated as a Maytag washing machine. because you could just turn it on and off. You could sequence it in a certain way. You could get the spin cycle, the dry cycle, whatever you wanted, but it just moved this camera back and forth all day long, 36 hours at a time sometimes to get these shots. It would take 1 minute of exposure to make the right wall per frame, and then 1 minute of exposure to make the left wall per frame, and then 1 minute to bring the camera back to the start position. So it's 4 minutes per frame to make the Stargate. So it took many, many hours. We had to have this thing running 24 hours a day. Here's my little focus cam. There's a little bearing there following this little weird focus cam that's sliding this thing in and out, that's changing the focus of the lens so that it's focusing from 15 feet away from this artwork to 1.5 inches away from the artwork in one frame. So each frame actually includes 1 million different focus positions, as well as these exposures of this textured artwork. So this is a layout. This is the camera. This is my focus ring, gizmo. It moves in and out on Selson motors. The artwork simultaneously moves behind this slit. So it's creating a plane of light that's exposing into the camera. And I can't explain it much better than that, but you know, if you drive your car around your driveway and keep your camera shutter open for a couple minutes, you'll see streaks. It's really just controlled blurs. But it was a lot of engineering to build this machine. And these were the, you know, some test shots that didn't make the cut. I did some other stuff that I actually ended up using in silent running later, of bouncing, instead of having a slit, I was bouncing light off of bent pieces of Mylar and getting these abstract gossamer kind of things. And then we did tests of trying to put the pod in there, which just seemed to be alarming. It just kind of broke the continuity of your becoming Keir delay. And so all that stuff was eliminated. None of these shots were ever used in any of the sequence. So at the end of 2001, there's 17 minutes of uninterrupted point of view photography, and the only thing you see of Keir delay is an abstract eyeball. Just the idea of some being perceiving all this abstracted stuff. So I'm going to cut through this pretty quickly as I can. This was a crazy shot we called the Mindbender, where we took slit-scan stuff, and that's a third of a slit-scan movie, another third of a slit-scan movie, and another third of a slit-scan movie made into one triangular movie. And these triangular movies are projected on these triangles. Each of these is a separate exposure onto these tetrahedrons. And this shot was called the Mindbender. It's in the movie. This was the storyboard for it. So there's these weird abstract shapes. Each of these has its own little time gate going on inside. Very complicated shot. So planning out that shot and doing all these multiple exposures. There's movies inside movies inside movies inside movies in this little scene. This was one of the most difficult scenes. Here's some early storyboards that didn't make the cut either, where you got a much better sense of the scale between the Discovery spacecraft and the size of the monolith. You know, there's the Discovery up there, that's the monolith. So the one you see at the end is really huge, but we never were able to actually film shots that looked like this. But these were ideas that went on in our heads. There was a whole sequence where the Discovery is reflected in the surface of the monolith, and an early idea was that the pod sees its reflection, goes toward its reflection, and then merges into its reflection. And that's how the pod actually enters into the monolith. And the Stargate was going to be inside the monolith. Couldn't make it work. Today, with computer graphics, it would be, you know, a couple of keystrokes and you'd be there. So all this stuff was various kinds of enamels and paint and lacquers on black water, photographed at about 72 frames a second. So we had a little trough that was just the size of a little baking dish with black water in it. The camera's looking straight down. Throw some paint on this water and it starts to do all kinds of weird things like this. Very simple. This whole shot is about 4 inches across. All these shots are about 4 inches across, size of a pack of cigarettes. And there was just thousands and thousands and thousands of feet of that stuff shot for this sequence, and then edited down. These are some of the anamorphic squeezed tests. And then the shots of Monument Valley and the Hebrides, which were live action helicopter and airplane shots, would then be solarized with this crazy process of taking the yellow, cyan, magenta masters of those shots and switching all the colors backwards. And nobody could figure out how to do it right. And so Kubrick decided to try out this randomness process. So he had a dial like a roulette machine, and yellow, cyan, magenta, and all different values. And so they would literally spin the tail on the donkey to arbitrarily select yellow for this shot, red for that shot, blue for that shot, a negative for this shot, throw them together, and so each frame would be different. And there would be thousands and thousands of frames of the same film until we came up with the right mix of positive and negative and strange solarized colors that would then be selected to do the shot with. It was incredibly laborious. But again, the pod was eliminated, tested, but eliminated. This is this famous set, lit from the floor, which was supposed to be a memory of Keir's from some earlier days. That was the aliens had extracted this memory from his head and constructed this comfortable cage to keep him in. And I had the grim job of building all kinds of props for this set, including fake telephone books and Bibles and all kinds of stuff that he would find that never got used. Little typical storyboard, Kubrick shooting Keir. It was really a beautiful set. And there's a long story about things that were built and not, shot. There was a thing where he finds towels and a robe. He says, "What is going on?" And that was all cut out. It just kind of jumps past it, and you find him already in a robe. You don't figure out how he got there. Looking at the reflections, it was very tricky to shoot in this room without seeing the camera in his helmet. And so they had to drape the camera with black velvet and make it in a very irregular way so that you wouldn't see it. This is the famous mirror shot. I love the shot. That's Stanley right back there. They're just hanging out, and he's got an air tube running in there to keep him from asphyxiating in this helmet. But there's the shot where frankly don't know if I have the shot in this show, but I think I do. He looks into the mirror, but it's actually not a mirror. Because if you think about the shot, you'd realize, well, the camera would be in the shot too. So it's actually a shot of a double set. And Keir Delay is looking at a double of him over the shoulder, positioned to move exactly with him, to look like a reflection. I think I may have that shot. But here's Keir getting ready in his elderly makeup, getting ready for that shot at the end. Stuart Freeborn did all this aging stuff on Keir. Keir still doesn't look this bad yet. Then we did a lot of experiments with aliens. I mean, there was an intention and a hope that we could do aliens in this movie. And Kubrick was kind of fascinated with Giacometti sculptures of these very thin, tall guys. And that was one little, lens flare kind of thing that didn't really work very well. I was trying this kind of video feedback. We called it Energy Man or an energy blob, that we would have a video camera looking at a video monitor. We just blip it with a piece of light, and it would suddenly start to replicate itself through a feedback loop, which looked very amoebic and very lifelike, but it didn't make the cut either. So there was things like that was all energy-related entities of some kind that we never did. Various kinds of slit-scan patterns and things that were moved in space to create shapes. Christiana Kubrick was sculpting aliens at home, and none of it made the cut either, but it just never could make sense. It was just Kubrick making the very wise decision to not put any aliens in this movie. Now, this was the beginning of one of the alien attempts. This is Dan Richter again, who played Moonwatcher, and he's a mime, and he is going to be Polka Dot Man. Now, they made this big leotard outfit for him and this set made of dots, and the idea was that you could photograph him from various angles as he did very exotic motions, and then we would be able to print this in the camera using this kind of what we call the Purple Heart technique of multiple printing with the reverse colors. So you get pink on red and green on purple and whatever else, and it would become very abstract, but it would look like it had some, at least, lifelike movement to it. And so a lot of the stuff was shot, but it was, the movie was just virtually running out of time. There was no way to actually get this stuff finished or into the movie by the time Kubrick had to release it. So Polka Dot Man did not make it. I've actually been thinking of scanning some of these and just doing some of the color to see what it might have looked like if it had been successful. As many of you may have heard, the monolith at one time was a tetrahedron, but then when it became a monolith shape, it was going to be transparent like a giant slab of glass. And Kubrick commissioned the molding of the world's largest piece of plexiglass, which also didn't make the cut. He took one look at it and just thought it looked horrible and dumped it, and it ended up on the front of a bank building in London. It's still there today. I can tell you where to look for it. So the Star Child went through a lot of iterations, trying to figure out, well, how are we going to do that? By the way, all the shots we had names. Line drive was one of the names. Like the entire Jupiter sequence was all football plays. Punt return, kickback, you know, because we couldn't remember numbers, but names seemed to make sense to us. So this was kind of a reprise of the idea of the Star Child meeting the occultation scene, similar to Universe. Star Child meets the occultation scene, similar to the opening of the movie. This was actually a test that was closer to the occultation scene in Universe. Here's Kubrick mulling over this idea, and he came to me one day. He said, "Do you think this is going to work?" And I said, "Yeah, I think you should give it a try." But it was it just seemed a crazy idea to everybody, but it actually was hugely successful. Here's the beginning of the sculpture of Star Child in a very early phase. I'm sorry, that's a really dirty print, but it's one of the only ones we have. And this was another try at almost a different version of kind of Polka Dot Man of the Star Child that would again be solarized and turned into some very strange abstracted colors. Didn't make the cut. So you get this transition into the monolith again, which is the big cut transition back to Earth and the arrival of the Star Child. And we came up with this matching shot of the Earth on one side of the shot and the Star Child on the other. You had no sense of scale. You had no idea whether the Star Child was now as big as the Earth or what. But it, I think it worked as well as it could have been expected to work under the circumstances. And I've been asked if the Star Child's eyes move. This was just last week, actually. I said, yes, they move. They're actually radio-controlled servos in the eyes, which you'll see in the I'm not sure this cut is long enough to show you that, but you'll see it in the film. Yeah, see, they're moving. Oh, they are moving. Thank you very much. Very, very, very kind. Thank you. What do you think? Should we just go right into Q&A, or what?
Yeah, let's.
Hey, I'm up for it.
Let's do that. Although I'll first say that was about 2001 moments of awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, yes, sir. Use the mic.
Sorry. I was wondering why you took so much trouble doing those slit photos instead of just building a three-dimensional model and photographing it.
Well, there was no way to. You mean of the Stargate?
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Well, that wasn't possible to do that. I mean, there was no lens in the world that has a depth of field from 1 inch to 15 feet on an oblique plane, but also it would not have had that sense of abstraction because, like in the Stargate, for instance, the camera's moving about 15 feet to and from this sheet of glass. The slit is about a 32nd of an inch wide. The artwork behind it is huge and very complex with very bright quartz lights, but the ratio between the movement of the camera during one frame of exposure was totally different from the ratio of the artwork behind the slit. So I could take that artwork and stretch it out so that even though the camera had moved 15 feet, the artwork had maybe only moved 6 inches.
Does that same description apply to the Jupiter?
Yeah, the Jupiter had the same thing. I designed the Jupiter machine so that even though what you see is 180 degrees of rotation, the artwork that's being projected only rotated 90 degrees. And I purposefully painted the red spot as a circle, knowing that it would become an ellipse when I stretched it out. And it just created a kind of an atmospheric spin to the planet. And it's that kind of photographic abstraction that took the whole thing way beyond, any kind of a literal model object.
So you couldn't just photograph a model and stretch the photograph in some way?
Maybe. You can give it a
I
try.
would've. It would have been cheaper.
I mean, you can do this with a couple of keystrokes on a computer today, but in those days, we were just dealing with the realities of the limitations.
Yes, we're. Yes, speak
No,
up.
but they can't hear you back there.
Yeah, okay. Early on, I remember reading,
I'll be honest,
that you had made the decision, or the decision had been made to switch the locale from Saturn to Jupiter because of the problem of shooting the rings. Were you involved in that decision?
Yes. And tomorrow in my 10 o'clock show, show number 2 of a trilogy, I'm going to show Saturn as I did it in Silent Running, because I realized that making Saturn was so easy because of what we did with the Jupiter machine here. I made a Saturn machine that did exactly the same thing, but since Saturn is just a gas giant, it has no detail to it. It's just bands of color. I could also make I made a little piece of cardboard that was maybe about a foot long and maybe 3 inches wide, airbrushed some color onto it, and spun the thing 360 degrees to create Saturn's rings. And it was unbelievably easy. It only took a few minutes. And I'll show it tomorrow in comparison to this. But at the time, doing 2001, we hadn't thought of that. So we did, realizing how difficult it would be to make Saturn, we did Jupiter as a fallback position as something we felt was more achievable at the time.
Yes, sir, and there's a mic right behind you.
Oh, thank you. Amazing presentation. Thanks, Mr. Trumbull.
Thank you.
2 questions. First is what you think of the movie Peter Hyams' 2010.
Oh, don't ask me.
And was some slit scan not used in Brainstorm?
Yeah, there is actually a little bit of slit scan in Brainstorm. Do you recall the scene? Are you asking rhetorically?
When they put on the helmet, there's a couple where they're...
Well, there's a little scene in Brainstorm where the character is in a flight simulator. It's a very kind of abstract flight simulator, but there's this plane that kind of looks like an airstrip or a airport or something that's very graphic and two-dimensional, but it's a plane. That was actually a slit scan streak photograph. I used slit scan a lot in television commercials after 2001. I kind of made a living on slit scan doing ABC network commercials and logos and stuff, and it has been used off and on, but never quite like this.
Sir, can wait for a mic.
Hi. I'm just wondering if you had any idea. Here I am,
Oh, there he is.
TCM guy. Just wondering if you had any idea, anyone had any idea on the production, how profound the film was in terms of creating a whole new sci-fi genre. I know for me, it created my love of science fiction. I saw it with my dad when I was a little kid, didn't quite understand it, but it created curiosity. Did you have that idea when you were creating these effects?
I'm not sure everybody on the movie did. I know for myself, I was on a buzz the entire time. I mean, this was like nirvana for a 24-year-old kid to fall into a job with Stanley Kubrick working on this movie and being able to progress so rapidly. Because when I started on 2001, I was just a young animation background painter from this company in LA. And so Kubrick hired me. He said, well, I don't know what you're going to do, but why don't you start on Hal's readouts? And so I did that. And he kind of said, oh, well, Doug knows how to do photography and blah, blah. And so just one thing led to another, led to another, led to another. And I had this really unique situation of kind of being a mascot to the British crafts unions. It was very stratified. You know, you couldn't work in the carpentry shop and the metal shop and and the wood shop or any other department except me, because I was this cute little California guy with a cowboy hat, and they kind of tolerated it. So I was able to dip into all the different departments and get some engineering done over here, get a model thing built over here, and get some lights over here, and build a gadget. And everybody kind of liked it, and Kubrick really supported me. He was fantastic, because he realized I was somehow intuitively solving a lot of intrinsic problems. And so I was just on a high the whole time. I was so excited about this movie. I was so excited about this opportunity to do these new photographic things that all these old guys hadn't never thought of in their careers. But I think there were a lot of other very seasoned, extremely professional, talented people working on the movie that were bored to tears with a movie that took 2.5 years to make. They were very annoyed. They wanted to get on with their lives. They wanted to go on to other movies. They wanted to get home to their wives and kids. I mean, there was all kinds of dynamics going on that were not entirely pleasant for everybody. So I don't think that buzz was shared by everybody, but I certainly felt very strongly about it, as I think Con Pedersen did, and a few of us. We kind of knew we were onto something special.
I just want to know if you had a master plan from start to finish, or as you were in the middle of putting all the pieces together, if you said you made decisions, okay, let's build a Jupiter machine. Like, did a lot of things sort of happen because you were at a certain point and realized, well, let's add this effect, or was there a plan from start to finish that you followed?
There was no plan from start to finish. There was no script from start to finish. There was just a kind of an overall mission to do this movie that Kubrick had embarked on. Kubrick and Clark kind of parted ways because Clark wanted to write the story one way as a literary piece. Kubrick wanted to make this visual thing that was not literary at all. It was completely something else. And the fact that the movie was a big R&D project to try to figure out the unknown and to try to put something on the screen that had never existed before was the process. And it's one of the reasons I actually do these shows. It's not so much that I want to talk about 2001 per se. I'm kind of over it already after 45 years. But in terms of telling people that the story is, the adventure is about the process. It's about the adventure of having the willingness to be faced with a problem that you want to do in your movie, whether you're the director or the writer, the producer, the cinematographer, the gaffer, or the grip, to be faced with a problem and realize that your job is to do it a different, new, better way than anybody's ever done it before. Otherwise, it's just another job. Now, a lot of people in the movie industry are happy to do just another job. I don't have that philosophy. I take every job I've ever had. The directors I've worked with have known that I am willing to go into uncharted territory. And it's a kind of intuitive skill that I have because my mother was an artist, my father was an engineer. I grew up around mechanical things. I was very comfortable with a drill press and a lathe and a bandsaw when I was 7. And so thinking about building a widget is very comfortable to me. And I'm just completely fearless about that. But I have an intuitive sense about what will work and what is really stupid, or what's going too far, or what will take 3 more years. So it's a thing about process. It's really the story I want to tell. It's about process. And you're going to get a lot of that in my thing tomorrow. You're going to see it in Blade Runner, but you can also see it in this overview I'm going to do at 10 o'clock of how these weird paths in my life have taken me into flight simulation, theme park rides, special film formats, breaking the rules of frame rates and film format aspect ratios, projecting movies into hemispherical screens, shooting in 3D, integrating computer graphics, miniatures, and live action in real time, all kinds of stuff that I really get a kick out of because it's different. I just get bored with the same old thing. So that's just kind of the overall thing. I could go on about that forever, but if there's anything I could say to you, it's just say, break the mold. Kubrick always said, if something's always done one way, turn it upside down and do it the opposite.
Well, we get a mic to you in the back room corner. Let's let the dude in the T-shirts up here go.
So I just...
do you ever think that the way they're doing films now that
you can go next. Don't give it up.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Do you think the way they make films now, that they've lost something in realism because all computerization. There's something in what you did that still seems real to me than some of the films I see now, where I know it's all computer generated, and my mind just doesn't go there because I've already, okay, I know what you're doing. I can't accept it. Is there something in what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. That one of the issues that I see, that's my personal philosophy about computer graphics. You can do things with computer graphics that are completely physically impossible, and that's great. I mean, you can do amazing stuff. I think the strongest aspect of computer digital image management is in compositing rather than using it to create photorealism. Because photorealism of a cathedral or a spaceship or a planet or a creature is nothing but a whole bunch of mathematical algorithms layered on top of each other into this hugely complicated matrix of polygons, shaders, animators, render farms, and all the kind of stuff that you do. And there's a weird thing that my philosophy about it is that the human mind and the human visual system is very, very perceptive and very, very smart. And as soon as you start a computer algorithm that's based on some numerical progression or some particle system or something, your brain automatically knows what the end of that shot's going to look like. Your brain is faster than the best supercomputer out there doing computer graphics. I think computer graphics are wonderful. They have their place, but I don't like filling more than maybe 20% of a shot with computer graphics. I like to use a lot of miniatures. And as I said, if I was asked to do any film, which I'm actually planning to do, by the way, I'm going to use a lot of miniatures and very little foreground set pieces. We're going to use digital compositing of live action into miniatures and computer graphics in a kind of a layered compositing technique with full camera fluidity, which we can do now in real time. And I'm trying to make a different kind of a mix. So we did a show for the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas that was really fun because it was for a simulator ride, which was projected into hemispherical screens. You're in a 15-passenger motion base, which is very powerful hydraulics, and I'll show some of that tomorrow. And the film is VistaVision, which is double 35, so it's 8 perf VistaVision running horizontally through projectors at 48 frames a second, with all the CGI rendered at 6K and 8K, in perfect synchronism of the movie with the motion of the motion base, and it's completely wild. Hugely successful, and actually started a whole business that I ultimately merged with IMAX and took IMAX public. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just really like to explore the potential of the medium of images on screens. If you really want to get me started, which you probably shouldn't tonight because it's getting late, but the screen is the retina of your eye. I don't care about that screen, a television screen, a computer screen, or anything. I'm kind of already somewhere else because we're working on what we call virtual retinal displays, which is tiny scanning laser beams that form the image on your retina. And what you will see, if I ever get a chance to do this, is images that will be fully three-dimensional, daylight bright, and indistinguishable from reality, and fill your entire field of view, and cost $50 and plug into your iPod. So that's the super future. That's probably, if someone gave me $50 million now, I could get that done in 5 years. I have all the people ready to do it. I actually have a patent on it. So I'm always thinking ahead. I can't always do what I want to do, but the world of imagery and everything it's something about the relationship of these images with what are you going to do with it. So if you had that kind of virtual reality, super realism, that's not a movie. That's an interactive, real-time experience. That's a completely other form of art. And that's the holy grail to me. That's where I'm trying to get. And all these other little simulation rides and the Back to the Future ride, which is really fun, and the thing I was talking about for Luxor was miniatures, live action, and computer graphics seamlessly merged together with fisheye lenses at 48 frames a second on these hemispheric screens, and it worked great.
So something you said a couple of questions ago really intrigued me, which is how, I guess, exhilarating it was to come to work every day and to get to work on stuff that was such a matter of pure invention all the time. And I guess what I'm curious about is what was it like to be that energized and I guess still be in your 20s and then to have the film come out and ostensibly be a failure, at least initially? And what was that experience like for you, given that it was your first?
Well, that was, shocking and disappointing and horrifying. But I would say the larger lesson that I've learned from that is that there's a lot of pain associated with being ahead of your time. Kubrick was 45 years ahead of his time. He's still ahead of his time. No one's touched 2001 in terms of cinematic language. That's why I put that title up there at the very beginning, that it breaks all the normal conventions of master shots, two shots, singles, and goes into this other world of first-person experiential cinema by exploiting this giant screen and making this movie in a completely different style that's made for you to be in space yourself. So that's the big theme I've been carrying around while I watch the movie business multiplex itself to death with crummy little rectangular screens and a horribly disappointing years and years after 2001 of frustration, which was why I consciously decided that even though I agreed for certain strategic reasons to do Close Encounters or Blade Runner or other movies I was trying to do, I was trying to get to this other thing. And I was doing these projects to get my hands on cameras and lenses and equipment to experiment with show scan, 60 frame per second, 70 millimeter film, which was hugely successful for a while. I can't remember where I was going with that thought, but it got me into theme park rides, World's Fairs, expos, and places where alternative cinema is embraced and encouraged. It is not embraced and encouraged in the normal movie business. Jim Cameron just kind of proved that geek is good because I think Avatar, even though it's a monstrously expensive movie, it was the geekiest movie ever made, most high technology movie ever made, but it's the most profitable movie ever made. And so you have to, the Hollywood, I can tell you, these guys' heads are spinning because they don't have a clue how Avatar was made. I'm going to talk about it tomorrow too because I have a video of the making of Avatar because it's very interesting deconstruction of the entire process of production where there's really no sets, no people, no locations, no nothing. It's a synthetic, 2/3 of it is synthetic. So there's too many things I don't want to get started on.
Hi, thanks. What's in the 17 minutes that was cut out of the cut? And are we ever going to see those 17 minutes?
Oh, well, we found the 17 minutes. Yeah, this is a funny story. I love this little story. Because we were working with Warner and saying, well, where's the 17 minutes? And where's the YCMs of the movie? Because we knew that Kubrick had struck a protection, what's called a protection master for the entire film before it was cut. And they started looking in their archives because all the original negatives of Warner Brothers films are stored in a salt mine in Kansas, 3 miles underground or something in this hermetically controlled environment. And they had this big database that they had made a few years ago using Excel spreadsheets or something. And no one had noticed that there was another column just off to the right of the screen that you had to scroll to the right. This is a true story. They found all the 2001 missing material in the other column. They said, oh, it's in Kansas. So they started sending guys down there and said, well, was it there? They said, oh, yeah, there's these big stacks and stacks of 70 millimeter film cans. And so they started shipping them out to LA and starting to do an inventory of what they had. And then we found out, well, they had YCMs, they had the missing scenes, they had the prologue for the movie. There was a whole prologue shot about the encounter of extraterrestrial life with interviews with major scientists like Margaret Mead and Frank Drake and people who were astronomers. That was lost, although there's a transcript of it. It's all there.
You mentioned earlier about the split between Kubrick and Clarke's approach. And one of the most sort of visual ideas in the novel of 2001 is that the monolith displays these patterns that are like testing the apes. And your Mindbender shot sort of echoes that. But was there ever any intention of doing a monolith with those sort of patterns, or was it always going to be a matte black?
Oh, no, it went through quite a transformation during production because there was an early intention, as in the book, and I can't remember which iteration I'm thinking about, but There was a tetrahedron, there was a transparent tetrahedron, there was a monolith, there was a transparent monolith, and it was kind of the thought process behind it that Clark was trying to get at was that the monolith, among many other things, was kind of a teaching machine. And so the first thing that occurred to us was that there'd be this stupid movie that would show up in the monolith that would say, well, here's how you take a bone and bang the other guy on the head. That's where we started. But Kubrick had the wisdom to know, well, that's going to be corny as hell and we're going to get laughed out of the theater, so what's next? And so everything in that movie is about process. It's about creative process, distillation, refinement, moving to the next better thing and just continually refining. And so this is all about less is more, refined is better than cluttered, clarity is better than complexity, and a whole bunch of other issues. So we went through all those things, believe me. This movie was really bad in its first version.
Mr. Trumbull, your craft is a true inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number one, what happened to your custom CP65 cameras? And number two, will there be any more gorgeous film-based acquisition?
The CP65 cameras are in a storage building in Long Beach, no longer used by anybody. Nobody's really shooting film anymore, although Inception, what's his name? Chris Nolan did shoot some 65 stuff for Inception. That's one of the most recent uses of 65. But generally, my feeling is these cameras are not getting rented. No one wants to buy them. No one wants to rent them. And now no one wants to store them. So I don't know what is going to be the disposition of these cameras. It doesn't really concern me because I'm already on another level already. I'm not worried about it at all. I'm completely beyond film. I'm not interested in shooting film at all. I'm utterly convinced that we can do digitally way better than 2001 and way better than the medium as it is today. And I'm doing experiments just recently with what I call kind of a show scan digital process of higher frame rates. And Jim Cameron talks about this regularly. He fondly remembers my show scan demos of 70 millimeter at 60 frames. Talks about it openly, and he says, well, you know, we had this big problem in Avatar, because when you make a 3D movie at 24 frames, the juddering between frames becomes three-dimensional negative artifacts. And so you have to slow things down, because if it moves too fast, the 3D goes away and blurring and strobing takes over. So the next iteration that I think is going to be happening, that I know is happening right now, is that Texas Instruments is delivering 4K DLP chips now to all the manufacturers. So the next iteration of digital projectors like this will have 4 times the resolution of this projector. It's already done. They're being manufactured and starting to be delivered. The movie industry is going to start moving from 2K capture with digital cameras to 4K capture. But as part of this, I believe that the industry is going to now start considering and possibly embracing higher frame rates, which gets rid of all the blurring and strobing. The negative aspect of that, it starts looking like something beyond television. It looks like a live event. It looks like what you're seeing is real, which is what ShowScan was about. Man, I was doing things that people believed were real 25 years ago. So I don't know what people's tastes are going to be about new digital media, but it is rapidly surpassing film. Easier, better, faster, cheaper, and non-toxic. So I really like it. I'm not worried about losing the wonder of Cinerama or even the wonder of IMAX. IMAX is just killing itself, in my opinion, by settling for 2K 3D and calling it IMAX. It's exactly what happened with Cinerama when they took the 3-strip system and turned it into 70 millimeter and diminished it. And so people's perception of what it was started to go down. And Cinerama ended. 70 millimeter ended. IMAX may end if they keep going in this direction. So don't get me started on that one.
All right, I can no longer deny the dude in the Battlestar Galactica shirt.
Ah.
John Dykstra.
Good man.
First of all, I'm gutted this documentary isn't happening. I've been waiting for it since I saw the trailer in 2009, and the fact that it's not coming and not being included in the 50th in the anniversary Blu-ray that Warner's has already announced, I'm just completely miserable. So I can't even give you my precocious question about whether you helped with faking the moon landing when Kubrick shot it.
Oh, actually, we had no, we didn't. We didn't. But years after
the documentary, yeah.
the Dykstra and I were working on this thing. I've got this funny booklet somewhere in my archives of this crazy project we were doing called the Epic Hoax of Apollo 11. It was really funny. And it was way pre-Photoshop or anything, but we made these photographs of the lunar surface that looked exactly like those Hasselblad photographs. But there was just a corner of a stepladder in the corner. Little giveaways that no one had spotted until now. We made this whole funny story about it. It was really hysterical.
I don't know if you've seen it. There's a French documentary that Christiane's actually in, basically saying, yes, Stanley shot this. Yes, they faked the moon landing. It's beautiful. Anyway, my real question is, working with Mr. Kubrick, working with Spielberg, working with Ridley Scott, Robert Wise, the role of the collaborator as obviously a very strong, independent artist. If you could talk about what it is working when you have your own views and what you think should be done, and an overarching director who obviously has the final arbiter on it. Just if you could talk about the dynamic of you as an incredibly strong artist and them as the controlling artist in that situation.
Well, thanks for asking that question, because I get to get on my soapbox about me as a movie director rather than a special effects geek. I think like a movie director. I've done it before. For various, very complicated and not worth discussing at great length problems that I faced as a young director, I had to make a living doing other things. And after I made Silent Running, I was the young enfant terrible in town. I was really hot. And I had development programs at MGM, Columbia, Fox, Warner Brothers, everywhere. Had a whole bunch of movies lined up. But they all went bad for stupid reasons. I was going to do a film for Arthur Jacobs, who did The Planet of the Apes. We would do a big underwater sci-fi movie, kind of like, Abyss or something like that. And he died. The project got tied up in his estate. I had a thing called Pyramid, with a futuristic end of the world movie at MGM. We had it all blocked out, script written, location scouted, and Kirk Kerkorian decided to build a hotel in Las Vegas and close the studio. End of project. Well, so this kind of went on and on and on. I said, oh my God, this movie business is really not so much fun as I thought. And so the other big part of my personal story, which I don't want to go into great length on, was when I was directing Brainstorm and Natalie Wood died. That stopped my whole directing career. That was my choice to stop my directing career, because I saw a seamy underbelly of Hollywood that I thought was so repellent and so horrible, and the worst personal experience of my life. I said, I got to get out of here. I left Hollywood. I moved to Massachusetts. I said, I'll do anything except a movie. So I just stopped my directing career. But over the years, I've gotten interspersed with those things I wanted to do for my own personal desires. I would agree to do Close Encounters for Steven Spielberg. I thought this guy was a fantastic director. I could learn from him. He knows I'm a director. And so we can think alike and collaborate. And so there was a kind of very respectful relationship between two directors, even though I'm the special effects guy. And so he would give me my head all the time. Same on Star Trek. Robert Wise just said, just take this sequence and do whatever you want to do. Get me out of here. He hated it. He didn't understand special effects at all. He let me direct whole sequences of that movie just to get it done. It was a disaster movie. Blade Runner, Ridley, it was just before Brainstorm and just after Close Encounters. And Blade Runner was a very small, low-budget movie. And I'm going to do a big show about Blade Runner tomorrow night. If you want to hear that story in great detail, you'll get it tomorrow night, so I won't tell it now. But it was wonderful working with him because he got it. He knew who I was. He knew he could trust me. He could just say, do this and this, and he was a terrific artist, so he'd do these wonderful drawings on napkins and say, run with that. So there was a tremendously respectful situation because my deal with him, I said, Ridley, I can't even finish Blade Runner. We're going to get halfway through the effects on Blade Runner, and I'm going to be directing Brainstorm, so that's the deal. You got to say bye-bye to me, and we're going to get Dave Dreyer to come in because even my partner, Richard Yursich, we had both done Close Encounters, and we started Blade Runner, but he was going to be my director of photography on Brainstorm. So we were both leaving. And Dave Dreyer came in. He was a wonderful, wonderful guy. And you'll see a lot of him tomorrow in the documentary. I'm going to show pieces of this documentary, which I just discovered, mysteriously hidden in the Blu-ray box set of Blade Runner. It's called Dangerous Days. Have you seen that one? Yeah, it's fantastic. It's one of the best making of a movie documentaries in retrospect. So I've taken a little clips out of that. So that's part of my show tomorrow because it really tells the incredible behind-the-scenes story on Blade Runner, which is very complicated.
So none of these guys were assholes.
Did you all hear that? What he just said? No, I got along great with every one of these guys. I never had a problem. There's all kinds of stories about Ridley Scott and all his problems with the crew and everything. I got along with him great. I got along with Kubrick great. I mean, all these guys have been great. So it's been very respectful collaboration.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. The gentleman before me beat me to the question about what you thought about all those people who were questioning the moon landing, the Apollo missions. But I like your answer. Douglas Rains, who did the voice of Hal, is he still alive?
Yes.
And now apparently he has never given an interview about his role. So was he one of the original 40 people whom you originally thought that you would be including in the documentary?
Yes, and I talked to him on the phone a few months ago. He lives up in Canada, not far from here actually, near Montreal or something. I talked to him on the phone because I tracked him down meticulously, got his home phone number, called him up, said, "This is who I am. This is what I'm trying to do." And it's weird because I'm talking to Hal. But he said, no way, not going to do it, not ever going to do it, never will do it, don't want to discuss it. He carried away from the movie some bad attitude. I don't know what it was. He might have felt underpaid, underused, admired. I don't know what his problem was. His voice is the narrator on Universe. That's where he got found. There were other actors that were going to play Hal, but it was really that voice that kept ringing in Kubrick's ear, and they decided to hire him, which was, I think, an incredible decision.
Yes, sir. Yeah, let's wait for the mic, please.
Thanks. Hi.
By the way, I wasn't going to give up on Douglas Rain.
Keep going.
I was prepared to drive to his house and get down on my hands and knees and say, "You have got to do this." And I thought there was maybe a 50-50 chance I could talk him into it if I came at him from the right angle with enough passion and told him how important I thought it was that he would do it. So
we'll all come.
Okay. All right.
Since we're on a somewhat of a level of sound, I'm just wondering, because I don't know how far your work went on the film right into post-production, but now that you're here, someone who actually worked on the film, I'm curious about your thoughts on the original score by Alex North, which was dumped. Now, there are plenty of fan edits online, YouTube, you can find them.
Yeah.
Both the Jerry Goldsmith re-recording and the original recorded score, which were found.
Right.
Fans have gone ahead and sunk this thing up, because obviously in the liner notes, courtesy of the label, they told you exactly where to drop that track. I'm just curious. Clearly, the classical tracks are never going to be pulled away. The film is what it is. But what do you think about the original score and how that might have played if it had been released?
I didn't like it. It was a much more conventional underscore where every movement is goosed and timed and fit, which I didn't care for it very much when I heard it. I knew there was a lot of problems because Alex was quite ill when they recorded that. The poor guy was conducting the orchestra from a stretcher or some crazy thing. And Kubrick was frantic because he didn't know what to do. I mean, he had hired this guy, paid for the whole score, had it, could have used it, but he didn't like it either. And it was only through collaboration with his wife, Christiana, and Con Pedersen's wife, who were sculpting aliens one day and heard Ligeti on the FM radio. And they said, "Stanley, we think we've solved part of your problem," which turned out to be fantastic. And some of the Strauss waltzes and stuff were in his children's record library, as I've been told from him. Some of the music was actually some of the music, like the stuff in the centrifuge. We're like that's where he wanted to go. He was playing those records during photography of classic musical scores. And so there's a million things written about how that all came to be, but I think he made great decisions. I think it was fantastic. I think that sometimes it actually makes sense to use an original piece of music that's so pure on its own and subsume your movie to it and cut to the music rather than the other way around. And there was something about the limitations that we had of photography where we had this kind of almost dance-like routine where as soon as Earth was coming into the shot, the space station had to be getting out of the shot or vice versa because we couldn't superimpose one thing over another. And we had this motion control thing where everything moved at a constant speed. So it had a kind of balletic quality to it that lent itself to this dance music, this waltz music. And so, Kubrick was amazing. When you see Terry Malick's film, you're going to see more of this for the first time in many, many years. You're going to see a score entirely from previously recorded major works. I'm not going to tell you anything about it because he doesn't want me to talk about it. Terry's a very private guy, but Tree of Life is going to be coming out in the next few weeks or months, and it'll be really interesting experience. It's probably going to be one of the closest films to the feeling of 2001 since 2001. And it is about the universe. It's about the universe from the beginning to the end in 1.5 hours.
At this point, I would actually just like to remind everyone that 2001 opens tomorrow right here at TIFF Bell Lightbox. Mr. Trumbull will be back in the morning for his presentation to students and faculty, and tomorrow night for Blade Runner. And Mr. Trumbull, thank you so much for an amazing evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.